Hello, truth seekers. If you're like me, finding a place to eat is never an easy thing to do. You want to try something new, but you end up going to the same place over and over again. And whether I'm in my hometown of Atlanta or traveling, I always find myself wishing I had a trusted friend I could call to tell me where to eat. Well, I found one. The infatuation is that friend. The infatuation helps you find the right restaurant for any situation. If you're vegan, vegetarian, looking for a special Mexican place, they've got you covered. You need a place for a first date? No problem. Trying to find a spot for that birthday that you really don't want to celebrate, but you kind of have to? They've got you covered there too. The infatuation has you covered in all these situations and many, many more. So, if you ever need to find a place to eat, but don't want to read through thousands and thousands of unreliable, crowdsourced reviews, hit up The Infatuation. You can find them at theinfatuation.com, or you can download their free app for iOS and Android to search for thousands of restaurants, reviews, and guides in 22 major cities around the world. And if you don't want to search yourself, no problem. You can let The Infatuation do it for you. All you have to do is send a text to 64560. And guess what? A real person with a pulse will respond and help you find a restaurant that's perfect for whatever situation you find yourself in. So try it out and let me know what you think. I think you'll love it. Caregiving is a constant learning experience. Vivian, Frazier. Hello, truth seekers. You are listening to the Welcome to Your Life podcast. I am your host, Renee Reed. Welcome to Your Life is an Atlanta-based lifestyle podcast for women, helping you to live the life you deserve. Yes, you can get organized, live a balanced life, and get rid of your belly fat. If you're looking for tips on how to energize your relationships, faith, wellness goals, and parenting, you've found your tribe. Welcome home. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to subscribe. And for those of you with a little extra change in your pocket, please consider becoming a monthly donor. Your gifts help to sustain our community and provide for future episodes. Today's guest is Dr. Erica Gamble, a 15-year veteran in the field of human resources. In this episode, Dr. Gamble provides us with some field-tested tools and tips to safeguard our employment while caring for a sick child or other relative. If you or someone you know is responsible for the day-to-day care of a relative who has a psychiatric diagnosis or physical disability, today's episode will be a life changer. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. So today we are talking with Dr. Erica Gamble. Dr. Gamble has 15 years experience in the field of HR or human resources. She is an author, a life coach, entrepreneur, college professor, yoga instructor. Dr. Gamble, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So today we are delving into how to practice self-care and also protect your employment if you find yourself caring for a chronically ill child or other family member, But before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your work in human resources, and why you chose that field of study.
Okay, so I am a college professor currently, but not prior to that, but the start of my career was actually in human resources. I started my career in human resources in around 98, 99, something like that. And actually it was by mistake that I actually entered into the field of human resources because I didn't know what it was. So when I was signing up for some college courses at the time, I believe I was working on finishing up my bachelor's degree. Human resources was one of the careers or whatever that you could choose if you were interested, and so I just chose it. Really didn't know what it was, and so once I started studying what human resources was and what it meant and the impacts that it could have on an organization or on the lives of people who work within an organization, then it became interesting. It did not become interesting until I actually started practicing. And one of the reasons is because human resources in theory is not what human resources is in reality. So a lot of the things that you learn out of the book about how to deal with certain aspects of human resources and what it actually means and what it looks like is not necessarily the reality of it. And so it wasn't until I landed my first job in human resources, which was actually an administrative assistant in the recruiting department, is where I started. And that's where the impacts actually started happening because I realized that I would actually be impacting people's lives. So, that's really how all of that happened. And so I'm glad that it did because I do believe, and I still believe, that human resources is a great career field for anyone who is interested in making change, impacting people's lives, and just making change within the organization that they support, or if they're considering their own business. It's also great information that an entrepreneur or business owner would need to know in order to successfully run their company.
That's great. And you said something really interesting about how this is a field that impacts the lives of people. And I don't think a lot of us think of it that way. I mean, the human resource manager is usually the person who takes your application and does the interview process, but you don't think of the entire role that a human resource department has to the health of an organization.
Yeah, that's true, because I think times have changed from, the human resources used to be called personnel. And so just as you described, what you just described used to be the personnel department. So that person would be the one to take the application, do the interview, do the paperwork, fill out the tax forms, do the payroll. That person was doing everything. And then around 2000, early 2000s, HR started to evolve, where it became like, okay, there is not one person who can do all of this. We need to have someone who is specialized in recruitment. We need to have someone who's specialized in benefits. We need to have someone who is specialized in employee relations and compensation. All of those things are specialized, and not every one person is able or capable of doing that. And so I think as a result of a lot of things that start happening in the workplace, HR, the trends of HR had to change, because you needed to have someone who would really be specialized in a particular role in order to deal with particular situations.
Wow, and that's so true, because you are dealing with employees, but these employees are part of families, and what happens in those families usually comes to work with the employee. They bring, sometimes it's unavoidable that they bring good things and bad things into work. And because we spend so much time during the day 40 plus hours a week. Have you found that the human resource department is able to, or has, implemented plans to really care for the employees and to help them to manage their lives outside of work as well as within the scope of their employment?
I think the answer would be yes and no. So I think the yes part of that would be there are human resources managers who are seasoned and have been around and understand the impacts of, people, and understand that, people spend more of their time at work than they do at home. And that also, too, I think a lot of it is if you as a human resources manager have personally had your own issues and situations, then you kind of know, okay, so I've been there, what did I do in this situation? Now how can I potentially help this employee? The no part to that would be, and no disrespect to the millennials or, the upcoming, people who are entering into certain fields, but I do think that a level of experience and expertise can change or be the deal breaker in whether or not an employee is able to keep their job, retain their job, or deal with the aspects of managing home and work. And so, a part of that, too, is, employees have to be made to feel comfortable enough to go to the HR manager and share any information that could potentially impact their employment. So if the employee is not feeling that level of comfort, or if the HR manager has not opened the door and invited them in, then there's going to be the opportunity for things to start shifting, because employees will then they'll make the decision based off of that manager's behavior, whether or not they want to share or whether or not they feel like this person is willing to help them or can help them.
Wow, and you said something really great about employees feeling that they have been invited to come in and actually share, which would require, a level of trust that I, as an employee, am not sure that I would feel, with my employer or former employers. But just to put what we're talking about in perspective, let's throw some numbers in here. So according to the Pew Research Center, just over 1 of 8 Americans aged 40 to 60 is both raising a child and caring for a parent. In addition to that, between 7 to 10 million adults are caring for their aging parents long distance, and the U.S. Census Bureau statistics paint a pretty bleak picture, because they are estimating that by 2030 there will be over 70 million people over the age of 65 or over, which means that we will have a whole generation of women and men, but mostly women, caught between raising their children, and in some cases their grandchildren, and caring for an elderly parent. So do you think that the field of HR, are they ready for those numbers?
So I think those numbers are realistic, number one, and number two, I think they are very alarming, given the fact that, today the difficulty in just finding resources for parents to be able to, find adequate care for a parent, for a child, and still come to work and be productive. So to answer the question, do I think they're ready for it? No, because I believe that the numbers are really, really rapidly changing. as this trend we're starting to see is happening. And number two, I feel like it could be addressed more openly, and HR could be prepared to handle it more if they were willing. And when I say they, because it doesn't mean that everybody is not, but HR managers have to take on the responsibility to do the research, to find resources that are available for the employees and bring those resources to the table if they want to have a productive workforce. Part of the issue is that you're dealing with a lot of different people, a lot of different generations in the workplace. So you have examples of people who have no idea that you can even get benefits around elder care. There are people who have no idea that you can get benefits that, take care of a person with that may be diagnosed with cancer or other things. And so education really is the key in this area, because you have people, when they're faced with these situations, the first thing that they do is panic. The second thing that they do is panic. And then lastly, they make impulse decisions on, well, what should I do? What shouldn't I do? And then they start talking amongst themselves and to their friends and to people who have no knowledge of what's happening in their life. And so you start getting a lot of bad advice, and then you start making decisions that don't make sense. So I personally believe that there's tons of opportunity out there for managers and HR managers to come together to say, hey, our workforce is not productive. Part of the reason is because I'm hearing that some of these employees are dealing with, parents. Some of these employees are dealing with sick kids. Some of these employees are dealing with sick spouses, whatever the situation is. And then again, invite them to have a forum. They don't necessarily have to disclose personal information. However, you can share information that could potentially help somebody. And at that point, then that's where that trust is established, because then they'll feel like, wow, she really knows a lot about this, and she's given us some insight, so maybe I can go to her and explain to her what's happening in my household. I think that's the key.
That is the key. I totally agree with you. I think that, in order for businesses to grow, there must be trust between the employer and the employee. And it's a two-way street. It has to be something that is cultivated and maintained, and has to become part of the environment of the, corporation or organization, and should be the lifeline of the organization. Because where there is trust on both ends, I think that, if an employer is thinking of how to put a dollar amount to that, research shows that if an employee has trust in their employer, if they agree or align themselves with the vision of the employer, you have not only a healthier workforce, but you have a workforce who will work for you and do what needs to be done in order to bring the vision to fruition. But most times, and I don't know if you agree, but most times you see employees just going to work and punching a clock and not really thinking of themselves as part of the overall vision or the overall success of a company. And maybe because they weren't invited, to the table, like you said, so they feel they don't have a say in how things are run, or maybe because they don't trust that what they say or the input that they're able to provide will be heard by upper management. So yeah, I totally agree with what you said. Do you think
that's true.
that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So just to I don't know, is there a HR definition of what would be considered a chronic illness?
Um, so not necessarily an HR definition. I think just an overall definition of the reality of what a chronic condition is, because it's not something that can be changed. So, realistically, a chronic condition is something that is really a condition or disease that is going to be long-lasting in its effects. It's something that it's most often a person could be born with, but not all chronic diseases people are born with. Some of them actually come over time. But the term chronic is really applied when the course of the disease lasts for more than 3 months. So I think that kind of answers that first part of your question, like from an HR, kind of standpoint. So when you think of common chronic diseases, you think of something that, okay, this is a disease that's going to probably be here longer than 3 months, probably longer than 6 months, and then you start going into years and then lifetime. So many common chronic diseases are things like arthritis. People don't think of that as a chronic disease. People think of that as, just something that happens and it hurts and, you have it. That's chronic. Asthma is a chronic disease. Cancer, of course, sickle cell, lupus. There's so many chronic things that fall in the category of chronic diseases, and there's so many diseases that aren't talked about that HR may not even know or understand because it's not talked about. But, and ultimately a chronic disease can become or can be a lifelong disease because the ultimate result of that is death. So, right. And then then that becomes a terminal illness.
And I like what you said about lasting more than 3 months, or, and I deal with or work with families who have children who have been diagnosed with either a physical or psychiatric disability. And these are disabilities that are lifelong, as you said. And what I've found is that, and that's how this topic even came about, is because, several of the families that I'm working with, they're single-parent households, and they have used up their vacation and sick time because they have children who need care, or in some cases they have a child and a parent who they're taking care of. And so, they're dealing with this and not having much, sympathy from their employer. And so I really wanted to, get your expertise and find out, how I can help them as a social services practitioner, but also to get the message out to, our listeners that there is something that they can do to protect themselves and to protect their employment. So what do you think the first thing that an employee should do when they find themselves in the position of being a caregiver for someone who is chronically ill?
So I think the first step in all of this is that people have to not be afraid to ask questions and not be afraid to talk about situations that they're dealing with, because if you don't disclose the information to your employer, and if no one knows what you're dealing with, then no one can help you. So I think the first step is taking out the fear of, am I going to be judged? Are people going to talk about me? Is this going to be spread around the office? And is everybody going to know? Because that's the first thing that I hear when I talk to employees in the past who maybe didn't tell me initially what was going on. They didn't tell me until it became a problem. And the first thing was, well, I didn't know how to, really come out with it because I was embarrassed or ashamed or whatever they feel. So the first thing is And again, all goes back to the trust. And sometimes that trust is not there, and sometimes that trust is not going to be there. But the person has to get over that and understand that whatever they're dealing with, they do have legal rights that can protect them and can protect them in their employment. And there's also lots of resources that can be provided for them when and if they're dealing with things of that nature. So the first step is disclosure. And the best way and the most reasonable way to disclose something like that is in writing. Most often, if you are a caregiver for someone, be it a child, mother, grandmother, sister, father, brother, whatever it is, because you can be the caretaker for anyone, if you're given that responsibility, then you should obtain documentation from their provider, their doctor, whomever is diagnosing the person with whatever it is, to put it in writing to say this person is dealing with their parent, and as a result of this, their parent has been diagnosed with XYZ. This is a long-term chronic illness or something that will never go away. Therefore, the employee may need some reasonable accommodations. That's the first step. And then the second step is understanding what you may have to deal with. So when you're dealing with someone with a chronic illness or someone who is sick or whatever, terminally ill or whatever, you may not necessarily know what that looks like from day to day. So you don't know if you're going to need a day off a week, 30 days off a month. You don't know. So then you have to find out or ask or do your own research and look at what's out there. By law, there are rules that protect employees for family medical reasons. And so the Family Medical Leave Act, that was enacted and put in place for people to be able to take off work and to take off from work to care for a loved one, family member, sick person, whatever, and not be penalized. So, the Family Medical Leave Act was enacted in 1993, and that's not that long ago. In reality, if we really think about it, it was, but it wasn't. There's so many people who still don't even know that exists. And so essentially, there are guidelines that there are rules and regulations to this, and there are some criteria that a person has to meet. And pretty much you have to have been on your job for at least a year or have worked 1,250 hours in order to be eligible for protection under family medical leave. However, if you don't meet that criteria, you still need to go to your employer to ask, are there any personal leaves that can be taken until that time comes where you have reached the hours and the time eligibility? Or is there options such as telecommuting? Can I work from home on the days that, I need to, care for this person? Or can I make up time if I need to take off? Can I come in earlier or later or weekends? There are so many options and ways that, this can work. However, it has to be a relationship, meaning that the employer has to be concerned and has to be pretty much invested. But then you, as the person that's dealing with this, you also have to be invested as well. And you have to pretty much come to the table with the knowledge and knowing what your options are.
And that is really I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, because you probably are going to.
And I was just going to say, I think a lot of times what we don't do is do our research. We don't do our due diligence. And then we're surprised by, that call to the HR office or, being put on a plan to get you back on track or, something of that nature. But if we do our research and if we're open to, understanding our role as an employee and also as a caregiver. And yes, it's difficult and it's stressful and it's draining. But like you said, if we do our research, then we can find out what's out there to help us. What resources can we put in place to kind of ease our burden?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And part of the one thing that we have to realize is it's our responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the HR manager to know what you're dealing with at home. So it's really your responsibility. And part of that research could be merely looking in the employee handbook. How many times do we start a job or, go into a new thing or organization and we haven't even read the handbook? We don't even know what's in there. We don't know what types of things exist. Also, it may not necessarily be in the handbook, but it may just require a conversation because there are alternatives, as I mentioned before. So maybe you don't meet eligibility for leave at this time, but there could be some alternatives that your manager can work out with the HR manager to help, to resolve the issue. Because all in all, it's stressful for both the employee, especially because of what they're dealing with, but then it becomes stressful for the manager and as well as the other employees, because now the other employees may have to pick up the slack, or they may have to, and often the other employees don't know your situation. So they just assume, oh, she never comes to work. He's never here. He always calls off. He's always out. They don't know what's going on. So the impact of one person being out or two people being out taking care of a parent or a sick child, it becomes a trickle-down effect. And now the productivity and the morale are both low because people feel like, nobody's coming to work and everybody's doing their own thing. And then it just doesn't look good. And that's going to happen. And it's not for the employee to disclose their personal information unless they choose to. And it's definitely the manager and the HR manager definitely won't or shouldn't be disclosing that information. But it does create stress in the environment. And I've seen it also create stress on the employee because they don't necessarily want to share what's happening with their coworkers because they don't want people talking about them. And, you got a sick kid or, you got this that you're dealing with. So they don't want to be the talk of the office. So all of that stress then combined and coupled with the fact that you're taking off work. Also, a lot of it is you're taking off work and you're not getting paid because with family medical leave, there is not pay involved. And so now you're not getting paid, but you have to take off. And so, now we got all kind of levels of stress that are coming into play because of a situation. So I think the key overall is knowing you have to know what's available to you and know what your resources are first. You can't expect someone else to know them and present them to you. And then you have to be aware and ready to accept whatever they are.
So with the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, how would you apply for that? And do employees know that there's no pay associated with that, or do they assume that they'll still be getting their regular pay while they're on leave? Or even how does that work? Are you able to take off a certain amount of time or just whenever you need it?
Yeah, good question. So FMLA, if you're eligible for FMLA, so again, the criteria by law is you have to have worked there 1 year and you have to have worked 1,250 hours. Now, there are going to be organizations that don't necessarily stick by that rule. That's going to be individual. However, they should be sticking by that rule because it could trickle down other things. So it's something that really should be followed, and it should be fair and consistent. So if you've met that criteria, if you've met that, then you would complete an application with, most often, depending on your organization, it's online, or you can go to your HR manager and let them know, I need FMLA paperwork. At that point, they will provide you with a packet of information that you would complete. And then you would there's also a section on there for the doctor or the caregiver or whomever to fill out that, they're actually justifying, this is correct, this is the situation. They would fill that out, and then you return that form to your HR manager, and then they would, determine approval. The leave is unpaid. So what FMLA is in place to do is protect your job. So what FMLA essentially says is this person has a family situation that they need to take care of. They have 12 weeks over the course of a year to take time off of work. So those 12 weeks can be either taken consecutively, they can be broken out week to week, they can be however you calculate the 12 weeks. So it's just a matter of 12 weeks. Now, some organizations have 12 weeks in a rolling year. So then as time, goes on, then you would reaccrue the time and it'll roll back on, and then it'll keep going. So it really, really just depends on, one, how the organization is set up. Two, it's a big difference between mom and pop type companies and organizations, because organizations like, big organizations like, Bank of America or, whatever, just big firms and big companies, they're going to pretty much follow the guidelines and the rules to a T because they have thousands of employees to deal with. If it's a mom and pop type company or small company or a small business, they may not be as strict on the rules. They may just be a little bit more lenient. You may be able to work something out, and it's a little bit less paperwork involved. But it's going to depend on who you work for. It's going to depend on the management team and the organization. But I would recommend to any employee that whatever agreements that you make with your manager, whether it's inside of the guidelines or outside of the guidelines, that you get everything in writing. Because I've also seen where managers and HR managers have made deals, quote unquote, with employees like, hey, you know what, you can just work the weekends since you can't come in during the week, or if you miss 2 days, a week, you can come in on the weekends. Then it becomes a problem with other employees, or it becomes a problem, or that employee is not following through with the agreement. Then the organization wants to terminate. Well, you can't terminate somebody if you don't have grounds. If nothing's in writing, it's your word against mine, then it becomes situational. So I would recommend that anybody that's going through this, whether you're doing it the legal way through FMLA and paperwork and all of that, or whether you're making an agreement with your manager, supervisor, or HR, that you get some sort of documentation that speaks to whatever conversation that you have, just to protect yourself.
And would you agree that, accumulating this paperwork, keeping track of it and keeping track of the time that you've used is also the employee's responsibility, also that they should be keeping track of the time that they use, and also keeping the HR manager or HR person that they are working with, keeping them abreast of what's going on, if anything has changed, or if or if things are getting better. Do you think they should keep them in the loop?
Absolutely. I think the tracking element of it is your responsibility as the person, because HR is certainly going to track and keep tabs on whatever they need to, and you should as well. That way, if there's any kind of discrepancies, you can come to the table. You have your document. This is what I know I use. This is what you say I use. We can come together and figure it out. It is not the HR manager's responsibility to keep tabs for you and for you to go to the HR manager and say, oh, I didn't know I was out of time, or oh, I didn't know I used 12 weeks already, or I didn't know I used 6 weeks. When? I don't remember taking that day. That's unacceptable, because it's, at that point, it's your responsibility to keep track of what you're doing. And also, to your point, yes, I think as out of just, just respect, but just out of, being courteous, you should let the HR manager know, hey, I don't think I'm going to be needing as much time, or yet things are getting better. So I think, this, we may be able to close the case, or we'll keep the case open, but I'll keep you posted, because that's the opportunity to build trust. because now the door is open. Now you're able to go in there, and you don't have to share. And that's the other thing I will speak to in 1 second. But then that trust is established where the HR manager is not, or the manager is trying to hunt you down, call you, leaving voice messages, emails, and all of this stuff, and you're not responding. Then the trust is that's going to determine everything, because now it really looks like, okay, what are we really doing here? If you really care about your job and you really care about this relationship, you would communicate. And so I've seen that too. I've seen employees totally take advantage of FMLA and time off, because oftentimes they may need it initially for something, but then they keep it, and then they just use it for their own personal time off use. And there are doctors out there who will sign off on FMLA paperwork for a small fee and will keep you out of work for a long time. So there's a lot of illegal situations that have happened as a result of this. So that's why it is really important for the communication to happen if you care about keeping your employment, and if you care about the relationships. And so in the second part I wanted to say is disclosing personal information. So while the HR manager will have the documentation, if it's signed off by a physician or a social worker or whatever the situation is, there's going to be personal information that is going to be shared on those documents. And that's about the extent of where that should go. The HR manager should not be asking you personal questions about your situation. You should not be discussing personal things about your situation. It gets very sticky, it gets very tricky, and it can backfire. I always warn employees to stick to facts and only disclose what's necessary. So, for example, my son has sickle cell. He had it at birth. And so, for my employer, I would have his doctor fill out the information on, the reasons why I needed to have FMLA. But clearly the diagnosis was sickle cell. We didn't go into personal things about what he needed, what we had to do, what we had to go through, he had to see a social worker, and he had to do this, because that's not their business. All they need to know are the facts. The person has sickle cell, the person has cancer, the person has lupus, the person has arthritis, the person's whatever. But once you start disclosing personal details, sometimes those personal details can be incriminating, and especially if the stories aren't always adding up. And we've seen a lot of that where the stories just don't add up. And so I think sometimes people, there are people who like to share, and people just like to normally or naturally talk a lot and share a lot of details. But when it comes down to personal things like this and work, I always tell employees to err on the side of caution. Don't over-disclose information that's not necessary, and keep it to a minimum. That's very important.
Yes, so you don't have to bring in treatment plans or, paperwork from the psychiatrist showing the diagnosis or anything of that nature. Is that correct?
That's correct. You just need to have paperwork signed by whoever is signing off to your situation and simply stating what it is. So if the child is diagnosed with, mental health or Asperger's or ADHD, whatever it is, that's all that needs to be put on there. They don't need to say that the child, called into the school and threatened to kill everybody in there. They don't need to disclose that, this child has, sickle cell and, needs a blood transfusion every 2 weeks, and he needs 3 liters of blood, and no, that's way too much, first of all. And then secondly, most oftentimes the HR manager and the manager aren't medical. They don't have a medical background, so they're not going to understand much of it anyway unless they've dealt with it. And it's just not necessary. It's just not necessary to disclose that.
And thank you for that, because that is great information. And I think we do sometimes overshare because we're trying to, just firm up our case and make sure that the HR manager understands how dire our situations are. And so sometimes we can overshare information that we really don't need to. So I really like what you said. Just stick to the facts and make sure that your paperwork is documenting those facts. And that's all you really need to show them.
Yeah, that's it.
So you talked a little bit about the stress that the employee is feeling, not just from, the fact that they're dealing with their role as a caregiver, but also the pushback they might be receiving from their coworkers. How would someone who, say you're someone who is trying to work your way up the corporate ladder and you find yourself in a situation where you are now a caregiver and you may need some time off to handle that obligation, how do you keep that forward movement in your career? What suggestions do you have for them?
So unfortunately, people aren't. How can I say this? So this situation or any situation that you have as far as being a caregiver for someone should not be held against you. But unfortunately, because we have human beings that we're dealing with, and not everybody has a sense of, I don't even want to say sympathy or empathy, but I feel like sometimes it's an opportunity for a person to penalize you or hold something against you because it's something that is really out of your control. So I'll use myself as an example. When I worked for Progressive in Cleveland. I worked for Progressive for over 10 years. The one thing that I made sure that I did with every manager that I had, because I had a lot of different jobs at Progressive, I went to them and shared with them exactly what I was dealing with in terms of caring for a child with a chronic illness, first of all. And then secondly, I had my documentation, already in hand, ready to, present. And then thirdly, I didn't take advantage of my time. So that was one way that, I kept that to a minimum. But also, I think it can often show just in the work and in your work ethic and then, how you do things. So, for example, I was working my way up the career ladder at Progressive in human resources. I started as an administrative assistant, then I moved into a role as a recruiter, then I moved over to benefits, and then I moved over to HR generalist. I made those moves all still while dealing with what I had to deal with at home. But at the same time, I didn't use what I was dealing with at home as a crutch for what I couldn't do at work. Because the difference is when my child was in the hospital or when my child needed to be at home or miss school, I was still working. I was still doing what I needed to do to enhance myself and my career. I was still reading. I was still doing things. So I didn't because I needed to miss a week, meant that I couldn't do a project at work, because I needed to take. No, I still did what I needed to do. And I think that holds true in anything in life. We always have setbacks. We'll always have setbacks, situations, trials, tribulations, and all kind of things that will come up. But that doesn't mean that we can't continue to push forward. Now, there may be situations where it may be a little bit more difficult depending on the severity of what you're dealing with, and how you work around that. However, if having your job is important to you, and if you need that job to pay the bills and you need that because that's your livelihood and that's how you eat, then you have to figure it out. And sometimes that may mean soliciting help from family members, friends, volunteers, other people to also help take some of the strain off of you if that's an option for you. I realize that's not an option for everybody. Everybody doesn't have family resources and help and support, to help them along the way. And so if you don't, then I feel like that's an opportunity for you to maybe look into some resources or to try to get some additional help if that's possible. And so at some point, if that none of that is a possibility, then you may have to make a decision on whether or not you need to take maybe a temporary leave of absence or take a period of time off where you can maybe get a handle on things, get a handle on the situation, whatever you need to do so that when then you can prepare to come back to work. And when you're at work, focus on work. And then when you leave work, then you can focus on what's happening at home. So I think a lot of that depends on, A, the situation of what you're dealing with, B, the severity of it, and then D, the level of support that you have versus the level of support that you don't have in order to help you move forward. I was just blessed. I'm not going to say I was lucky and I was just in the right place. I was just blessed because the managers that I had, they not only understood, but they trusted me. And they trusted that if I said that, hey, I have to take off Wednesday to take my son to his appointment, and I'll be gone, most of the day. However, I'm still going to deliver on whatever it is that I needed to deliver, or I'm still going to show up, Wednesday night once, we get home from the doctor, and I'm still showing up at the office, or I still came in on the weekends or the holiday, whatever I needed to do to build that trust to let them know, yeah, I do have a situation, but also I realize I have a responsibility at work as well.
And
so
I
I
like
think
what
it lies
you said.
in.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I like what you said and then we've been talking about HR, but I like that you said explain to each of your managers, what was going on, just so that they were kept in the loop. And should that be your first? Should that be the first person that you confide in about what is going on before you go to HR? Should you bring your manager into the conversation?
You should. Your manager should be your first level of communication. But, over the years, realizing that not everyone gets along with their manager. But when you have a situation like that, you kind of have to make a decision that you're going to get along. Because ultimately the HR manager still has to loop your manager in. So there's really no way around it. If you and your manager don't have a good relationship, but now you have a situation and you need to take some time off work, well, yeah, your manager has to know. And your manager is your first point of contact. That's the person that you need to communicate with when you're not going to be at work, when you need to take time off, when you can't come in, when things are going, you have to let your manager know. And so the HR manager's level of involvement really is only at the level of the paperwork, making sure that documentation is there. And then the HR manager is also there to help with resources and, and for guidance. But the HR manager is not the go-to for you to cry on their shoulder and, whatever, and, this is what's happening. That's not the responsibility of the HR manager. And realistically, the HR manager is really also there to be that gatekeeper, too, and make sure that that manager is also being professional and handling the situation as it should be and all of that. So it's best to have a good working relationship with your manager if you have a situation, because that's pretty much where it's gonna lie between you and the manager.
Because your manager ultimately could be your greatest ally, in making sure that you're able to keep your employment if the company feels that you are no longer bringing enough to the table in order to justify them keeping you on board. Would you agree with
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. Because they may say, well, now it's review time, annual review time. Now, keeping in mind that a medical leave of absence or family medical leave or disability, those types of things should not first of all, should never be discussed in a performance review and shouldn't come up. But we're talking about human beings, and we're talking about people who judge and people who use things against you. And so because those things shouldn't be discussed, but, yeah, the organization could say, you know what, it's time to lay off some people. And who do you suggest would be first on the chopping board? And if you don't get along with the manager, you haven't been communicating with the manager, there's problems, all that, you're going to be on that list, whether you have a situation or not. But if you're that person who's been communicating, to your manager, letting your manager know what's going on, bringing in the paperwork as you need to, but also making sure that you're doing your part, then there's an opportunity there for the manager to say, while, this person has some personal issues that they're dealing with and, they do have an approved leave, but I do think that there's potential. I do think we could keep this person in despite their issues. This person could really be impactful to the growth of the organization, or this person could really help turn our department around, whatever it is. So communication is going to be the key. And there are some situations where none of that's going to happen. The person's going to say, get rid of her. She just got too much going on, too many problems. Bye. Okay. Right. There's nothing we can do about that. There's going to be some one-offs. There's always that. Mm-hmm. Nothing. It's not ever a perfect situation. But I think it's imperative that you do what you need to do to earn your own keep.
And I know that you are just to switch gears a little bit, a yoga instructor. Is that something that you started or practicing yoga as part of your own self-care when your son was ill?
Actually, no. I didn't. Actually, I didn't start practicing yoga until about 7 or 8 years ago. I wish that I would have known about yoga in the 90s because I do feel like that could have not just helped me. I feel like it could have helped him as well. But, and maybe as you know, or, some of our listeners, African-American people weren't, yoga wasn't talked about. It wasn't introduced in the communities. It wasn't heard of. It wasn't for us. And it just wasn't. It just didn't exist. And so a part of the reason, why I started yoga, I was introduced to yoga by a coworker of mine who, she's like, oh, I'm going to a yoga class, or I think she was having a yoga party, something that I'd never in my life heard of. And I think she invited people, and she said, hey, do you want to go to yoga? And I'm like, I don't know what that is. I was very apprehensive. And part of my apprehension was because of the preconceived notions, because I said, we don't do yoga. That's not what we do. So how am I going to fit to this? And I thought you had to look a certain way or be able to do certain things in order to practice. And so finally, when I went to the class, it was really one of the most challenging things that I ever had to do physically, but then how it made me feel after it was over made me make the determination on that experience. And so I continued to go, even though it was very hard. I think that's the thing that people don't know about yoga. Yoga is very difficult. It's not easy. It can be, one of those things where it's very physical. And if you don't do something the right way, you could ultimately hurt yourself. And so I wanted to continue to experience how I felt after that first time. And that's when I started my journey with yoga. And the other part to that is becoming a yoga instructor was that I wanted to, use this as an opportunity to reach out to people who have the same apprehensions that I did and the same preconceived notions and, people who don't even know what yoga is and what it means or any of that. And so that's what really made me decide to continue to move forward in my practice. Yoga definitely helps me to connect with me first, and it also helps me to become mindful of my thoughts, my feelings, how I approach things, and then introducing all of that into my own physical body. So I do feel like practicing yoga can help you, gain a level of body appreciation that you will never, ever experience. And so I wish, and so I'm not going to say I wish, part of my, I'm going to call it my ministry and my desires is to potentially reach out to parents who have children with chronic illnesses or whatever, things that they're going through. For me, like, when my son was going through his treatments, we would spend, 5 to 7 hours in the hospital at a time doing a blood transfusion. Well, that would have been a great time for me to pull away for an hour and go do a yoga class. How great would that would have been, and then I could come back and be feeling good physically, but also being, better able to help him. And so that's something that I would love to do is to, pull parents away for a second, even the ones who may be dealing with a parent, an elderly parent, a chronically ill parent, husband, whatever, and in the hospital settings, in whatever settings they're in, and just say, okay, we're going to take this hour and devote it to ourselves and just become better and balanced and, so that we can be better for the people that we're caring for. So that's my ultimate goal for my yoga journey. And I do feel like over time, once we start getting out into the communities and introducing yoga and spending a little bit more time on educating people about what it really means and what it really does, I think we could, see some difference and some impact for sure.
I love what you said about, because my next question was about self-care, and I love what you said about, you wish you had known that you could step away for a little bit to take care of yourself and then come back and be refreshed and be able to, take care of him and to give him what he needs. I think a lot of caregivers forget that part. And so, burnout is real, and all of the health conditions that come from being burnt out, the emotional eating, the weight gain, the headaches, the chest pains, those are things that we experience because we do not practice self-care. So what tools or tips would you suggest to those of us who are, working or managing a career and trying to be a caregiver at the same time?
I think that no matter what we're dealing with and no matter what we're going through, if we are not 100% within ourselves, then we're not going to be able to effectively care for anybody else. And that's a fact. So I think many of us can relate to or may know someone who has been struggling with a child or a husband or a parent, and they took care of that person and they did everything, and that's all they focused on, and then they ultimately ended up needing some of their own care or fell ill or something happened because their focus was all on the other person and not so much on themselves. Dealing with a sick child and being at the hospital, being away from work was very stressful for me. And I always felt like I didn't have the additional time to go and work out or exercise or just take a moment just to breathe, or even I didn't even take moments to pray because I felt like I didn't have the time. I don't have time to stop and pray because I got to deal with this child and I got to deal with this and I got to do this and I got to do that. But what I realized is that if I would have taken on the opportunity to even give myself 45 minutes to an hour per day, every day, how much more significant or how much more of a better caregiver that I could have been for my son. And I think it's important that we do that, and part of it is the introduction, because the hospitals don't probably have the resources to do that. They need people, they need volunteers. They need people to come in and say, hey, I'll do it. I'll come every day from 12 to 1 and do a yoga class for people who are sitting in the waiting room, waiting on somebody to come out of surgery, waiting on the parent to come out of here, waiting on the child to get the, somebody has to start, and we have to start somewhere and do it and then we can, see the difference in helping other people. I really feel like that would be a huge impact and a huge turnaround. And I think even for the people that we're dealing with, if they're physically able to, also to take an opportunity to use that and care for themselves as well and introduce them to some things. It doesn't necessarily have to be the physical movements of yoga. It could be meditation. It could be learning how to meditate, something as simple as meditation and sitting quiet, quieting the mind and, being still in the body.
And that is, and I think one of the things that, when we think of self-care, we immediately feel guilty, for thinking of ourselves. How can I think of myself when I have this child who is sick or this parent who is ailing? How can I possibly pull away for 45 minutes? But it's like you said, if I don't take care of myself, then I will end up needing care. And then where will I be? Because if I am the caregiver for this child or this parent, who is going to be the caregiver for me? And I think that is a question that caregivers need to ask themselves and, need to, like you said before, look in your community, ask your HR manager, ask your church or your synagogue or your mosque, where are the resources that will help me so that I can have some respite care, someone to come in and help me so that I can have some time to myself and recharge and re-energize so that I can come back and fight the battle and be prepared to fight the battle instead of, battle fatigued, which is what a lot of people are facing right now. And
absolutely.
Yep. So you have given us some really, really great information. I'm so, thankful that you were able to be on with us today. If someone wanted to get into the field of human resources, what are the steps that you would suggest they take?
The first step is decide if you like people or not.
Right.
Because if you're not, and I'm not saying that you have to be a people person, but you do have to be open. You have to be considerate. You have to want to help. You have to be resourceful. You have to be willing to sometimes do the work and do the footwork in that field. And sometimes the HR manager will wear so many different hats. You have to want and be willing to take that on. Otherwise, it'll just become a miserable job for you. It won't be like second nature or love or something that you can just do with your eyes closed. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there are, of course, degree programs in human resources. There, everything from associate's degree on up to a doctorate degree in the field of human resources, along with certifications. So for me, like I said, I kind of fell into it because after I got my associate's degree, I got my associate's degree in small business management, entrepreneurship, in small businesses, which I thought at that time, because this was, again, in like 1990 something, I'm like, what am I going to do with that? But then I moved forward and got my bachelor's degree with a concentration in human resources. And then that really tied in with the degree. And then I, moved into my doctorate, my MBA, and on into my doctorate degree. So there's lots of opportunities. I'm sorry, my dog is barking. There's
is that Diamond?
Yeah. Oh, okay. There's lots of opportunities for people to enter into the field of human resources and different aspects of it. But I think doing some research and understanding what the expectations are, looking at job descriptions, maybe understanding what the role requires, maybe looking at, a realistic preview of what an HR manager does and what he or she is responsible for would be a good way and a good introduction into the field and really to determine whether or not it's for you. Because I do know that the HR community has changed. It is evolving. It's no longer just the standard person, necessarily sitting in the office working 9 to 5. There's lots of different approaches that HR managers take. HR managers are now training. They're doing training. They're doing development. They're tapping into so many other things as well. So it's really one of those things where it's much needed. Diversity is definitely needed in the career, and it just really requires a special, type of person to want to really take that on and make some change. So.
Wow. And I think one of the things that you kind of glazed over, which I will toot your horn for you, is that you were able to earn your MBA and your doctorate degree while taking care of taking care of your son who was ill, but you also had another son. And you were able to do that and raise them. They're, grown up now, but I just want to applaud you for that work. And I think that you're a perfect example of what can be done if you, do your homework, do your research, and really pull in the resources around you to help you achieve your goal. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I will say it definitely wasn't easy. It definitely wasn't easy. It did not come with, a lack of sleepless nights and, just a lot of heartache and a lot of struggles and just a lot of wanting to quit and all of that, because it's just not easy, but, it's worth it. And that's part of the reason why I do what I do and really want to help inspire and encourage people and let them know that they can do it, because, I dealt with a lot of things. And, having a child that's sick, if you have a child that's sick, I don't know anything about having a parent that's sick because I didn't have to take care of a sick parent. But having a sick child and knowing that it's a lifelong illness, it never's going to go away. So at that point, I had to determine whether I was going to accept that or not, deal with it or not, and then how we needed to move forward, because it was something that wasn't ever going to change. So my advice to anybody is that if that's your situation, you have to decide whether or not you're going to stay in it and never move forward, or you deal with it and life has to go on. And so you still have to work towards the things that you want to, regardless of any situation that you're dealing with, even if it's you, if it's a spouse, if it's a child or a parent. You still have to make the decision to take care of you, because I knew that if I would not have continued on and got my education and done the things that I needed to do, how would I be able to take care of my children? And right. So that was a decision that I had to make, in addition to dealing with that is, okay, I still have to take care of them, and I still have to be a resource to them, and still need to do things and take care of myself and my life. So, that's why life coaching is so important, and, just reaching out and being advocates in the community and, all of that for people to see that there is hope and that it can be done.
And out of your, taking care of your son and really volunteering with the Sickle Cell Foundation, I think both in Cleveland and in Atlanta, is that correct?
That is correct.
You wrote a book. So tell us a little bit about your book and how, where did that, the concept for the book come from, and how can we get a copy of it?
So I did. I wrote this children's book, and honestly, I tell people this all the time. I wrote that book in like 5 minutes. And
Wow.
it was just, I remember it was just like one day I was just sitting at my desk, and I said, I had the idea to put a children's book together. The reason for the idea was because, again, when my son was going through his situations with his chronic illness, I often always went to the library to look for resources to kind of help explain his situation to him in a childlike manner. And there were no books about sickle cell, no children's books. Everything was adult books. It was just all these words and medical terms and all of this stuff. And there were no children's books. And so for a long time I thought about it. I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. Nobody's talking about this. The kids don't understand. And then he had a sibling who certainly didn't understand. He wasn't old enough to understand. And I just had this idea, and I'm like, you know what? I need to put out a children's book about this boy having sickle cell and having a sibling who doesn't understand what sickle cell is and why it's happening and why mom and dad have to spend time away and at the hospital and all of that, and put it in a childlike manner. And that's what I did. So I actually wrote in 2014 or 13, I can't remember now, my brother has sickle cell. And so actually I got input from my younger son and asked him, like, what were some of the things that you remember dealing with, while your brother was also dealing with his situations? How did it make you feel? What did you think? What questions did you have? And so he kind of helped me with the dynamics of the book. Like, one day, my brother and I could be outside playing, in the front yard, and then the next day my brother's not there. He's at the hospital. I don't know why. And so that's how that idea really came about. And so I published the book through Author House Publishing, and the book is actually available on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. And honestly, when I wrote the book, I didn't write the book thinking about book sales and becoming a millionaire and being on the New York best-selling Times. I wrote the book for people who were like us, or who are like us, who may not have resources, who may have other children who don't understand the disease, or just something to be able to help them understand, from a different, type of perspective. And so after I published the book, I took the book to the hospitals and talked to, social workers and different people in the hospitals, really to offer the book kind of for free, even though the book is for sale, but just to let people know that there is a resource out there. It actually exists, and this could be helpful. And so many people have responded back and said, wow, this really helped. My kids really enjoyed it. We sat down as a family and we were able to read it together. Now my, son or daughter or whatever have a better understanding of, what this means and what it looks like, and, really just seeing the impact of it. And so that's actually where that idea came from. And so I was thinking about doing a sequel, maybe doing a second one, possibly. I'm not sure yet, but, just want to continue to impact the lives of people and help people as they're dealing with these things. So, yeah, that's where that came from.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I will make sure that I put, that information in the show notes. So if anyone is interested in purchasing the book, the information will be in the show notes, so they can go right to Amazon and check out. Before I let you go, this is a question that I ask everyone on the show. What do you think is the one thing that we can do, as people in this space that would help to create a little more peace in the world?
Wow, that's a tough question. So I would just say there's a lot of things that we could do, but I think the number one thing is to be more concerned with the well-being of others. Be the light, and I know we see that a lot. Be the light that you want others to see. But I really think that holds true. We have to be the light that actually shines and help people, because there's a lot of people who are living in darkness. There's a lot of people who have lots of things that they're dealing with that they don't know how to deal with. And there are many of us who have resources to help. And so we have to be the voice for those who are voiceless. And I think that just comes with being nice to people, offering a helping hand to people, sometimes just offering to do things for free, not always thinking about money and, charging and doing that, but just really being more of a resource for those who may not have the resources available to them. I think that's just really important, helping other people.
Wow.
Because, I think that's it, especially with all the darkness that's going on. We just have to, there's always, out of 10 people, there needs to be 2 or 3 that's just willing to step up.
Thank you so much. I have learned so much today, and I'm sure our listeners have also, Dr. Gamble. So I really want to thank you for being with us today, for sharing your knowledge and your story, and also for, bringing a little Black Girl Magic to the show. You are, an example of what, can happen when you just make your mind up that I'm going to do it, and failure is not an option. And so I really, applaud your efforts and the effort that you extend to our communities, both in Cleveland and here in Atlanta. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure, and I'm happy to do it. And like you'll put the notes in there, but if people want to reach out to me as well for, any additional insight or volunteer services, something that they may need help or assistance with, you can put my information out there as well.
Awesome. I sure will. If you want, can you give us your email address or your website?
Absolutely. So you can reach me at my email is Dr. Gamble, so drgamble1972@gmail.com. And then my phone number is 678-600-4568. Those will probably be the 2 best ways to reach me. If you shoot me an email or a text message or leave me a voicemail, then I'd be sure to get back to you that way.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And everyone, that's the end of our show for today, but check out the show notes. All of Dr. Gamble's information will be in the show notes. If you need to reach her or if you want to purchase her book, I will be sure to add that information in also. And thank you for being with us. And I'm just in awe. I don't know of all the information that you gave us. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good night.
Good night. Caregiving is a constant learning experience. Vivian Frazier. Hey, Truth Seekers. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can comment below or shoot me an email. Renee Reed at reneereed.net. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at I am Renee Reed. So let's connect there. Hey, have you subscribed yet? Come on, join the family. We would love to have you, and I don't want you to miss one episode of this podcast. Did you know that becoming a monthly donor is a great way to keep the flow of ideas moving and changing our world? I can't do what I do without you, so thank you in advance. And don't forget to share this episode with someone you love. Until next time, remember, you are stronger than you give yourself credit and more blessed than you know. We'll talk soon. Bye.